Hello and welcome back. So we've made it up to book 3 of the Nazarene Acts as we're working our way through the Rock of a Sure Foundation. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. Meantime, Peter, rising at the crowing of the cock, and wishing to rouse us, found us awake, the evening light still burning. And when, according to custom, he had saluted us, and we had all sat down, he thus began: Nothing is more difficult, my brethren, than to reason concerning the truth in the presence of a mixed multitude of people. For that which may not be spoken to all as it is, on account of those who hear wickedly and treacherously. Yet it is not proper to deceive on account of those who desire to hear the truth sincerely. What then shall he do who has to address a mixed multitude? Shall he conceal what is true? How then shall he instruct those who are worthy? But if he set forth pure truth to those who do not desire to obtain salvation, he does injury to him by whom he has been sent, and from whom he has received commandment not to throw the pearls of his words before swine and dogs, who, striving against them with arguments and sophisms, roll them in the mud of their own carnal understanding, so that they can take pride in the boasting of their own idiocracies. Wherefore I also, for the most part, by using certain circumlocution, endeavor to avoid publishing the chief knowledge concerning the Scripture, concerning the supreme divinity to unworthy ears. So, in other words, and this is a problem which I've had, and I think anyone who's tried to speak truth that is not widely accepted by people, you run into this challenge. You have people who are operating at this lower level of understanding, and when people have a lower level of understanding, they tend to place you even lower than themselves. So you for instance, to put it like in a modern sense, it's like imagine a college professor speaking to a room of students that just came out of high school, and he's trying to explain physics to them, and their brains are still functioning on elementary levels of algebra and stuff, and so they think that the professor doesn't know what he's talking about, when in reality it's because they haven't got to the level they can understand what's being said. And that's essentially what church does to you. It keeps you in this mindset of believing in these superstitions like the infallibility of text, instead of seeking after, like what Peter encouraged us to do, is to try to understand the mind of the lawgiver, try to figure out what's pleasing to God. It's not about serving a book and learning the book's desires or what the book says. It's about forming this relationship to God, that the book itself is just meant to be a guide to get you there. It's not meant to be this thing that you place between you and God, and you can't see God because the book is in the way. And that's what ultimately seems to end up happening. So how would you even go about instructing people? It's a little bit easier to do in this respect the way I do it online, because I can say whatever I want to in a video, and you're not going to be interrupted or heckled or whatnot. The worst that'll happen is you'll get some nasty comments in the comment section, and those are pretty easy to deal with. You just block them. But I've often thought, just standing before a group of people, how would you even go about introducing some of the things that I discuss on here? Because they've been put into this box that it's almost like their brain can't even understand it. And I've been there. I've been there with trying to explain that to people, and it's like you say one thing, they hear something totally different, and it's like this weird cognitive dissonance kind of effect on them, where they can't even understand what you're trying to explain to them, because their mind is so engrossed in false beliefs. It's what Peter speaks about back in book 1, chapter 15, where he says, these are the things that have caused the truth of God to be lost. And one of those is like evil assumptions, or something similar to that, some type of assumptions, whether it's evil or wicked or false or what. But that's essentially what it is, these false assumptions that people build their whole paradigm around. They keep you from being able to see clearly what's being said. It's like that smoke that fills up a room. Until you get the smoke out of the way, you can't see clearly. As Peter was saying these things, Aquila said, you have spoken correctly, but for our sake tell us what is the specific elements of truth. Peter said, ask about the matters that you wish. And Aquila said, investigate the matter of the primal and the primals, and of the powers, and of what Simon reprehends is incorrect, namely, for the Son of God to be called Messiah, for fear that God seemed to suffer things as plants and other inanimate things do. Now, as Peter saw that all desired to hear this, he expounded the entire matter as follows. And so this part that we're getting into now, this is the part that in the Latin translation of the Nazarene Acts, the translator wouldn't even translate these chapters, the next 9 chapters or so. And it wasn't until recently that we even got a translation of the Latin, and now, of course, we also have a translation from the Syriac. So what follows is, I took both of these translations, the Latin and the Syriac. I had 2 different versions of the Syriac, and from those 3 different documents, I tried to figure out the best meaning of the text, the best English words to use, because some of this was really almost impossible to understand. And some of it, I think, had to do with the words that were chosen, the English words. So you look at 3 different translations of a single word, you kind of get a good idea of what the word means. And now is there an English word that maybe we could use that would express the meaning better than the word that these translators chose? And so this is kind of what I came up with. I think is probably the best and most understandable translation of what's being said, but a lot of the stuff that Peter talks about, to be quite honest, are pretty deep, and it's a little difficult to understand. So it says the designation primal is used for many different things, both sensible and intelligible. So sensible, that is something that you can use your senses to sense. Like, this is the way that Peter is using this word. So if you can see it, if you can touch it, if you can hear it, this is what he means by sensible. You can use your 5 senses to discern that it's there. Intelligible is something that you can't sense with your 5 senses, but you can determine that it's there. You can see the evidence of its presence, and you can understand it. It's something that's understandable, so it's intelligible. So sensible is usually something that word's typically used for something that's like a good decision to make, but the way that it's being used here, it means something different. It means you are able to sense it. But for fear that we should seem to turn the intelligible before testing the sensible, it is proper to begin first with the visible, in order that, taking an example from what is near at hand, we can come to an understanding of intelligible matters. So one way of sensing is to see something visible. So this is one of the 5 senses. So he's saying first we're going to start with things that are visible. Of course, visible is a type of sensible thing. And then using that as an example, they'll come to an understanding of intelligible things, things you can't see. Thus the sun, for example, was constituted as the beginning or the ruler of day, but the moon to the contrary. Now these were constituted to exercise rule by the one from whom they received existence in the beginning, but the one who arranged these things earlier created heaven and earth, and moreover he fashioned animals of the land, water and air, trees and plants, and after these the man. And he was received the primal not only in order to exist, but also in order to live according to the commandment of God. So, and he, the man, received the primal. This would be the designation of primal. This is Adam. So when you hear scholars sometimes talk about the primal Adam doctrine, that's it kind of ties into this a little bit, but this is related to that primal Adam. So Adam was the first man. He was meant to be the ruler of man, and so he's the primal. The primal Adam doctrine is essentially, the Ebionites had a belief that Messiah was, you could say he was a second Adam. Sometimes it seems like what they're saying is that they believe that the Messiah was the reincarnation of Adam. But there's some type of connection that Yeshua is believed to have with Adam, and what exactly it is difficult to determine from the documents we have. I think that they believe that he was a reincarnation of Adam. Professor Eisenman calls it an Adam redux, an Adam redo. Whichever way helps you to, I guess, wrap your mind around it. That's what's being alluded to here. Thus, it is possible for there to be many primals, but for him who is, there is no origin. So, him who is, that's the Father, he just exists. There was no origin for the Father. He's always been there. For there is one primal and one without origination. So again, this is the Father. Origination is like a beginning. He is without beginning. The primal is created. So a primal has to be created, but him who has no origin, he's not a primal. He's just the one that is. But the later things are called by custom, if indeed they are named primal. Now, earlier I expounded the reasoning of this progression, namely from the sensible to the intelligible, in order that having pursued this path, we might attain solid and certain security regarding the tradition of the intelligible. Therefore we say that God is without beginning, as ineffable providence demonstrates. He is not made by himself, nor generated by himself. He is namely without beginning and without origin. The name non-originated, which non-originated, again, is without beginning. He has no origin. Allows us to understand not what he is not, but rather that he is not made. So non-originated means you are not made. And he gets to where he switches back and forth between these terms. And so as we're reading through this, you got to kind of get in your head that these terms, there's things that kind of mean the same. Non-originated, not made, that means the same thing. Without beginning, that means the same thing. So then if he switches between these terms, it makes it easier to follow along if you just can understand that he's phrasing the same concept in different ways. Those who have called the non-originated Father to himself and Son to himself have endeavored to blaspheme, pursuing dubious reasonings. For they have believed, perceiving with the judgment of infants, that the one who existed before he was born was in need of birth, and setting up what was not instead of what was. They have raved insanely to speak as if he were made by himself, and they have dared like demoniacs to compare what is non-originated to plants. I think what he's doing here, he's kind of attacking the whole Trinity doctrine. But all these things constituted in impiety have ignorance as a consequence. They have not understood this, though they say that the same one both exists and exists not. To the extent that he begot, he existed, but to the extent that he was born, he existed not. Therefore, to the extent that he was born, it is certain he existed not, but to the extent that he begot, it is certain that he existed. The profession of piety does not permit one to sustain both things at the same time. So, again, this to me has elements of what was taught about the Trinity doctrine when I was in Catholic parochial school. We had they would spend days after days trying to explain the Trinity doctrine and all the self-contradictory stuff that it involves. And so this some of the things that Peter's saying here in this paragraph reeks of that. It's the similar things as to what they were saying to us. Again, even common sense should forcefully drive such blasphemy away from us, granting us the ability to give the non-originated the honor that is due him. What then should one say when he is questioned by those who ask such impious things? Did he not exist before he became father to himself? The one who existed before he begot himself so that he could exist? By what sound rationality can he possibly be called father to himself and son to himself? And if indeed he did not exist before he begot himself, what would be the previously existing sign of intelligence? It is ludicrous to say the being that was not made was made by himself. Yet they believe that they say this with authority, like the inebriated who declare their own shadows to be ditches. Therefore, as we investigate immortal things, it is appropriate for us above all to start from the traditions of our Master, where he teaches us the duty of mortals, who are subordinated to those who are immortal, so that we might endure dangers and temptations, even unto death itself, on account of the hope of the good things of the kingdom, saying, do not fear those who kill the body, but who are unable to kill the soul. Fear rather the one who's able to do away with both the body and the soul in Gehenna. By the way, like this whole blood atonement thing, this doctrine of the Pauline doctrine about the crucifixion. So this I think in this paragraph he really touches on the reason Messiah died. It was not about blood atonement. It was because the Master taught us the duty of mortals who are subordinated to those who are immortal. In other words, we're subordinated to God, so that we might endure dangers and temptations, even unto death itself, on account of the hope of the good things of the kingdom. This is what Yeshua did. This is why he died. He was demonstrating to us that we are to remain faithful, even up unto death, on account of the hope of the good things of the kingdom. Think about the conversations that he had before his crucifixion, at the Last Supper and the time that he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, about how he was speaking to the apostles about the coming kingdom of heaven. I think part of that was not only was he trying to encourage them, but he was trying to encourage himself too. Like, there are times that I will say things on here and you think I'm like preaching to you about things, but I'm really kind of preaching to myself about things that I need to do. And I think maybe there was some element of that too with Yeshua, him talking about how he's not going to drink wine again until he drinks it with his apostles in the kingdom. This looking forward to the kingdom. It was a major theme of the Last Supper. It was a major theme of what went on in the Garden of Gethsemane, and I believe that he was trying to focus himself on the hope of the good things of the kingdom, because he knew he had to endure dangers and temptations even unto death. But when people say, well, why did Messiah die if he wasn't a blood sacrifice for his Father? This is why. He's demonstrating to us that we should endure dangers and temptations, even unto death itself. And truly, if the soul does not die with the body, then it is certainly not mutilated. It doesn't, nor does it suffer any other of the things that the body suffers. For example, either filling up or draining out, or thinness or density, or health or infirmity, detachment or conjunction. So in other words, the spirit is more or less untouchable by mortals. Mortals can't damage the spirit. So the body suffers, but the spirit or the soul does not. But also in the procreation of humans, the soul doesn't change according to maturation, but in every stage it remains, namely an unchanging substance. But by the various motions toward every affair, the soul, directs the body. So in other words, your soul doesn't change. It doesn't grow up with your body. Your soul just is. It's unchanging. Therefore, the body experiences and suffers in its existence and in its being in order that the soul may be able by experience to make examination and learn. So again, this is what I've said before, that the reason for our existence here in this realm, in this physical realm, is to learn and to grow. So why is there suffering in this realm? Why does God allow suffering? Because suffering is meant to help us grow. But your soul is not damaged by the suffering. Your body is. Your body is temporary. This whole existence we're in today is temporary. The point of this existence is to get to the better existence in the other realm, the spiritual realm, heaven, whatever you want to call it. So the evil and the death and the destruction and everything that goes on in this realm, it's all temporary. And suffering in this realm is part of God's plan. And it is to help the soul, by experience, to make examination and to learn. This is a education, our time here in this realm. For after the nourishment of those who are being born, there is the evacuation of the womb, this is birth, because of the growth of the fetus, which thrusts and is expelled as if in a struggle through the creating word. For what was formed hurries to exit, while what causes the formation desires to expel. Again, this is the birth process. This cause conveys ancestral temperament and the replication of likeness to descendants, but when passion has been made, a general hazard arises more often than a specific one. So this is alluding to why you have traits passed on from father to son and so forth. But also everything that is yoked to the desire of women is naturally influenced and prepared beforehand in all stages of a man, and thus a child is one way with different conduct than an adolescent, and a man yet in other doings. So this is talking about you're growing up, you're maturing, you're changing. For an infant possesses the ability to maneuver some things, but does not yet possess the ability to move the soul. For his part, the adolescent is prepared to make a decision, but does not yet have the use of disciplined discernment. But a man by his will attains the resolution of perfection. And not from these matters alone should it be said that the soul is immortal while the body is perishable, but also from the commands that pertain to it. The soul, generally, as the Master said. It was said to those of old, do not commit adultery, but I say, do not be enslaved to desire, even by sight and appearance. And he spoke much divinely, for a body is naturally bound. A body is naturally bound to desire, the association of women, unavoidably subject to those things from which it has received both its existence and its form, which is also the first principle of physical procreation. How then can one think that it was said to the body, do not commit adultery, but I say, do not be enslaved to desire, and not rather to what is free of such passions and substance, having the power to direct and guide the body by effort, to which the command of greatness admonishes. So what he's saying here is that when Yeshua made this command not to commit adultery, he said naturally he's not speaking just to the body, because the body doesn't have that discernment. You know, the body has urges, it's subject to these desires, your body is. But that Yeshua was speaking to our soul. The soul is the thing that's detached from desires. And he's saying, do not be enslaved to desire. In other words, keep your soul above such things. So then, hoping in future things, we do not get angry. We subdue rage, and we turn our sight and our mind away from women, raising consciousness through the hope of future things. And as I said, not everything that we are is enslaved to the desire of women. But while one part serves nature, namely the body, as we showed, another part is free through the mind, namely the shifting of the immortal soul. So it's worth pointing out that he's speaking to a group of men. So if any of you ladies are like, why is it all about men and women? Well, he's speaking to a group of men. Obviously, the same pertains the other way too. Like, there's no women present, so that's the reason he's speaking to men specifically. But the same goes the other way. Like, women should not commit adultery either. Women are submitted to this desire of men. So just consider what he's saying, but just in the other way too. Like, it works both ways. You shouldn't let physical desire, rule your life. You have to understand that there's a part of you that is above that, and it should be kept above that. Do not become so enslaved to desire that you actually end up turning your soul in that direction too. Like, I think what he's saying is, through this discipline, your soul is kind of kept out of being controlled by the body. You know, you don't want your soul being controlled by the bodily lust. You want your soul controlling the body, not the other way around. Since these things are so, we have found a most favorable path for the comprehension of intelligible things, as one might say, through the will of God. Let us therefore proceed without danger, using the helm of the immortal soul, furthermore not allowing carnal passion to encroach upon the immortal and intelligible substance, allowing as much honor for each of the intelligible things as the order of one who pre-exists allows. For first there is the non-originated, to whom the prophets present the testimony, I am the first God, and I am after these things, and excepting me there is no God. Now by this is to be understood that he is without beginning and without origination. But Clement and the others asked, wishing to hear what this non-originating being is, and Peter took notice and said, the danger is not small in speaking or hearing about the one who has no beginning. But you, through the desire of things that have been said, are in danger of invading greatness. And as I see, you are entrapping me also to suffer this, you who have believed to be able to snatch from me about what is hidden and unspeakable. But I admonish you, brothers and fellow servants, not to ask what he is, but to desire to hear only that he is, and to say more than this is not fitting. The non-originated should not be honored through the mere name, for it is even without beginning. But this being without beginning and non-originated is God, which is only proclaimed in the limited perspective of those things that have been created, but truly is only understood by himself. For he will not find something of himself that existed at first and see something of himself made later, by which it would be established that he is without a beginning, because this is rather the investigation of things that are created. So, try as we may to understand God, he can only be proclaimed, and I would say only be understood, by the limited perspective of those things that have been created. And this is another reason why I say, sticking this Bible between you and God, and only viewing him through the pages of a book and refusing to come to him directly is a mistake. Like, if you, our minds themselves cannot fully understand. We have a limited perspective. So even using the full resources of your brain and your mind and your soul, you're still not going to be able to understand God, because he's so great and so immense that you won't be able to. So you certainly cannot confine him in the pages of a book. You just have to understand that that book is a guide to get you to where you can just begin to understand him. You can just barely begin to scratch the surface. Therefore, what is ineffable, what is unspeakable, an investigation of itself, does not have room to see beforehand what was before it was. For curiosity of his own existence is not favored by the one who is. So in other words, if we start examining his own, like we start coming up with theories about God the Father's existence or his essence, he doesn't really like that. And he probably, I don't know if Peter says it here, but he probably doesn't like it because we're not going to be right. It's like making up stuff about him. We don't like when people just make stuff up about us, right? So why would God the Father want us to start making stuff up about him, and then to make it even worse, than to go and teach that stuff? The only thing we can know about the Father is what the Son reveals to us. So all of these theories and creeds and doctrines made up mostly by the Catholic Church, I would say, it's all just nonsense. Curiosity of his own existence is not favored by the one who is. So, stick that in your hat. And think about that for a few days. Therefore, the one who does not inquire about himself knows himself. But we have said these things even though it is beyond what is seemly, for what is non-originated loves to be honored by means of silence alone. Therefore, according to what we are able to discern, you have received without danger this being without beginning. So, in other words, Peter's not really wanting to talk about him because he's not wanting to say things that are not true. And people start asking you questions after questions after questions. You end up either having to tell them you're not going to discuss it anymore, or you end up saying something that's maybe not correct because you're trying to answer their questions, and then now you're teaching falsehood. And that's the thing you have to deal with if you are instructing people in any way whatsoever. I had an issue yesterday. Like, somebody asked me a question, and I responded to their question with there's no text, there's no early text that answers your question. So I don't know. In other words, you're going to have to figure that out for yourself. And they didn't like my answer. They acted offended because I wouldn't just give them, like they had already predetermined the answer they wanted to hear. But I wouldn't give that to them. I just said, the text is silent about what you're specifically asking. So I'm not sure what the Ebionites specifically believed about it. And I think Peter's kind of doing the same thing. He's saying, look, I've answered what I could about what you want to know about the Father, but going beyond that, I'm not comfortable going beyond that. Because it's like he said here, curiosity of his own essence is not favored by the one who is. He'd rather just be honored by means of silence alone. In other words, he'd rather you just be comfortable in the knowledge that he exists and leave it at that. And know that the Father's there, know that he exists, know that he was from, without beginning, and anything beyond that, you don't really need to know. And even if you could know it, you're not going to be able to understand it because it's beyond your limited resources of understanding. We can't comprehend the Father because we are from beginning. We're created beings. We can't comprehend him. He's too far beyond us. You might be able to understand a snippet of something about him, but that's as far as it goes. All right, I think we've spent enough time on this video, so we'll cut it off here, and we'll come back and we'll pick up at chapter 8. Shalom.